I wish I had never created that app. That was the last thing Leakin thought before his world crumbled. The sleepless nights coding, the ambition, the hope of making a difference, it all turned into a nightmare he couldn't escape. Leakin was a 27-year-old tech genius living in Soglas, Cordana. He was well known among his peers as a self-taught programmer, a prodigy in a country where opportunities were scarce and connections mattered more than talent. Despite all odds, Leakin had made a name for himself in the bustling Soglas tech scene. Soglas was a city of contrasts. Skyscrapers stood tall next to slums, and while the city buzzed with energy and hope, corruption lurked in every corner. For Leakin, technology was a way out of this chaos, a tool to fight back against the forces that held his country back. Growing up, Leakin had always been good with computers. As a teenager, he had hacked together his first website, showcasing his talents to a small group of friends. From there, he taught himself how to code, spending countless hours learning everything he could about building apps, websites, and software. He had become obsessed with the idea of creating something that would change Cordana for the better. One hot afternoon, as Leakin sat in his small, cluttered office, an idea struck him. He had been scrolling through social media, reading countless complaints from Cordanans about the government, about the billions of Cordanan dollar lost to corruption, the pothole-ridden roads, the failing healthcare system, and the promises that were never fulfilled. It was the same story every day, with no end in sight. What if people could actually see how their money is being spent? Leakin thought to himself. The idea was simple, but it held the power to shake the foundations of Cordanan politics. What if citizens could track government spending in real time? What if people could see, with their own eyes, where every Cordanan dollar was going? Contracts, projects, budgets all out in the open, for everyone to scrutinize. Leakin believed in transparency. He believed that if people knew where their taxes were being spent, they could hold the government accountable. And so, the idea for his app was born. He called it Spender Tracker. The app would be a tool for Cordanan citizens to track public spending. If the government allocated money to fix a road or build a school, the app would show how much was spent, who was awarded the contract, and whether the work was actually done. It would be the ultimate weapon against corruption. But Leakin knew this wasn't just about technology. It was about taking on a system that had been entrenched in Cordana for decades. Corruption wasn't just an issue, it was a way of life for many in power. If Spender Tracker worked, it would expose those who had been profiting from the country's resources for years. Leakin also knew that if this app went live, he would be making enemies, powerful enemies. Once the idea for Spender Tracker took root in Leakin's mind, he couldn't shake it. Every waking moment was spent thinking about how to make it work. But he knew he couldn't do it alone. He needed a team. Leakin reached out to a few of his closest friends, young tech enthusiasts like himself. They were idealistic, driven, and hungry for change. Together, they formed a small team, working out of Leakin's cramped office, which also doubled as his living space. Day after day, they coded, researched, and brainstormed. The work was grueling, but there was a fire in their hearts. They weren't doing this for money or fame, they were doing it to make Cordana a better place. As the app began to take shape, Leakin felt a sense of pride he hadn't known before. The platform was simple, intuitive, and powerful. With a few clicks, users could see the entire budget of a public project, the companies involved, and whether the funds were being spent as promised. Leakin knew that if Spender Tracker caught on, it could revolutionize how Cordanans interacted with their government. It would empower people to ask questions, demand answers, and fight corruption head-on. But there were challenges. Getting the data wasn't easy. Cordana's government wasn't exactly forthcoming with information, and many contracts were buried under layers of bureaucracy. But Leakin's team was relentless. They used every tool at their disposal, data scraping, public records requests, and investigative journalism to gather as much information as possible. The work was slow, but progress was being made. After months of development, Spender Tracker was ready to launch. Leakin and his team decided to start small. They didn't want to attract too much attention just yet. They launched the app quietly, spreading the word through social media and word of mouth. At first, only a handful of people downloaded the app. But as more people began to use it, the buzz started to grow. Within weeks, SpenderTracker had gained a loyal following of users, mostly students, activists, and civil society groups who were hungry for transparency. Leakin watched in amazement as the numbers grew. People were using the app to track everything from road construction to school building projects. They were sharing their findings on social media, calling out government officials and demanding answers. For the first time in his life, Leakin felt like he was making a real difference. One day, as Leakin was going through some data on the app, something caught his eye. There was a project, a large contract meant to fix the drainage systems in Soglas to prevent the city from flooding during the rainy season. The contract was worth billions of Coordinate dollars, and it had been awarded to a company Leakin had never heard of. Curious, Leakin dug deeper. The company, it turned out, didn't seem to exist. There was no website, no office, and no employees. Yet, billions of Coordinate dollars had been dispersed, and the project was supposedly completed. But there was no evidence of any work being done. Leakin's heart raced as he continued to investigate. The more he dug, the more suspicious things became. The company, as it turned out, was linked to one of the most powerful politicians in Soglas, Honorable Chief Tayo. Tayo was a household name in Cordana. He had been in politics for decades and was celebrated by many as a man of the people. He was a populist, known for his fiery speeches and grand promises. But behind the scenes, Leakin had uncovered a web of corruption that stretched far and wide. Tayo had stolen billions of Coordinate dollars meant for public infrastructure, using fake companies to siphon money into his own pockets. And now, Leakin had the proof. He knew what he had to do. Leakin decided to go public with the information. He knew the risks. He knew that taking on someone as powerful as Tayo could have serious consequences. But he couldn't sit on this information. The people of Soglas deserved to know the truth. Leakin posted a detailed report on the SpenderTracker app, outlining everything he had found. He didn't hold back. He named Tayo and his associates, provided evidence of the fraudulent contracts, and demanded that the government take action. At first, nothing happened. The report was met with silence. But then, one of Cordana's most influential newspapers picked up the story. Within hours, it went viral. Social media was on fire, with people sharing the story, tagging government officials, and demanding justice. Leakin watched in awe as the story spread like wildfire. He had never seen anything like it. People were furious. Tayo's name was being dragged through the mud, and there were calls for his immediate resignation. For a moment, Leakin felt like a hero. But that feeling didn't last long. A few days after the report went viral, Leakin received a phone call late at night. He didn't recognize the number, but he answered anyway. "Who do you think you are?" The voice on the other end was deep and menacing. Leakin's stomach turned. "You think you can just go around ruining people's lives? You better stop poking your nose where it doesn't belong, or you'll regret it." The call ended abruptly. Leakin sat in silence, his heart pounding in his chest. This wasn't the first time he had received threats. Being a whistleblower came with its risks, but this one felt different. It was more direct, more personal. He didn't sleep that night. The next day, Leakin's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Some of the calls were from people praising him for his bravery, but many were from strangers warning him to back off. Some were angry, accusing him of lying and trying to destroy a good man's reputation. But the scariest calls were the ones that came from blocked numbers, the ones that simply said, "You're going to pay for this." Leakin tried to stay focused on his work, but the pressure was building. He had expected some backlash, but not like this. It wasn't just online threats anymore. One evening, as Leakin was leaving his office, he noticed a group of men following him. They didn't approach him, but they made sure he saw them. The message was clear: he was being watched. Things escalated quickly after that. Leakin's office was broken into one night while he was out. His computers were smashed, and all of his files were stolen. It was obvious who was behind it, but when Leakin reported the break-in to the police, they shrugged it off. They didn't even bother to investigate. Leakin began to feel like a target. Everywhere he went, he had the uneasy feeling that someone was watching him. Strangers followed him on the streets, and he started receiving strange packages at his apartment, envelopes filled with photos of him, his family, and his friends. The message was clear: back off, or else. Leakin's team began to fall apart. One by one, his co-workers quit, too scared to continue working on SpenderTracker. They had families, they said. They couldn't afford to be targets. Even the media, which had initially supported him, began to pull back. Journalists who had praised his work now seemed hesitant to cover the story. It was as if everyone was afraid of challenging the powerful politician. But Leakin couldn't walk away. The final straw came one evening when Leakin was on his way home from a meeting. As he turned down a quiet street, a car pulled up next to him. Before he could react, a group of masked men jumped out and grabbed him. They dragged him into an alley, beating him mercilessly. One of them held a knife to his throat. "You think you're untouchable," one of the men growled. "This is just a warning. Next time, we won't be so nice." They left him lying in the dirt, bruised and bleeding. Leakin lay there for what felt like hours, too stunned to move. When he finally managed to get up, he realized just how far this had gone. He was no longer just a whistleblower. He was a target. And these people wouldn't stop until he was silenced. A few days later, the unthinkable happened. Leakin's younger sister, Yemi, was kidnapped. Leakin had always been close to his sister. She was his best friend, his confidant. When their parents passed away, Leakin had taken it upon himself to look after her. She was the only family he had left. The kidnappers didn't ask for money. Instead, they sent a simple message: take down the app, or you'll never see her again. Leakin's world collapsed. He was faced with an impossible choice: continue his fight for transparency and risk his sister's life, or give in to the demands and lose everything he had worked for. He reached out to the police, but they were useless. They told him there was nothing they could do without more information. It was clear that Taiyo's influence ran deep, even within the police force. Leakin was on his own. 4 days, Leakin wrestled with his conscience. He knew that giving in to the kidnappers would mean the end of SpenderTracker. It would mean letting the corrupt politicians win. It would mean betraying everything he had stood for. But he couldn't bear the thought of losing his sister. In the end, Leakin made the hardest decision of his life. He took down the app. He wiped the data, deleted the website, and disappeared from the public eye. It was over. A few days later, Yemi was released. She was shaken, but unharmed. Leakin had saved her life, but at what cost? Leakin moved to a quiet part of town, trying to rebuild his life in the shadows. He had become a ghost, a once promising entrepreneur who had been silenced by a corrupt system. The hero who had once exposed fraud and corruption was now a broken man, haunted by the price he had paid for the truth. Taiyo remained in power, his reputation largely intact. The scandal had been buried, and those who had once called for justice had moved on to the next story. Leakin's story became a cautionary tale, whispered in tech circles and among activists. Some said he should have fought harder, while others believed he had done the only thing he could to protect his family. But Leakin knew one thing for sure: in Cordana, the price of truth was too high. And he had paid it in full. Years later, Leakin's story resurfaced when another young tech enthusiast stumbled upon the code for SpenderTracker online. Inspired by Leakin's bravery, they decided to relaunch the app under a new name, with stronger security measures and anonymity features. The fight wasn't over.